The Galactic Academy of Xenobiology had trained its students to recognize death long before they ever graduated. Every species in the known systems had predictable biological limits. Lose too much blood? Fatal. Severe skeletal trauma? Fatal. Organ puncture? Definitely fatal. First-year medical students memorized these thresholds until panic became instinct. When something crossed the line, treatment ended and recovery protocols began. Humans confused all of it. Most students had only heard rumors about the exchange species from Earth. Apparently, humans were loud, reckless, and strangely comfortable around danger. Their biology reports made little sense either. Bone density far above average. Muscles that tolerated abuse. Bodies capable of healing injuries other species classified as catastrophic. Most professors assumed the reports were exaggerated. Then there was Ethan. The human exchange student had spent the first month casually alarming everyone around him. He bumped into things hard enough to bruise and laughed it off. Burned his hand during chemistry practical and responded with, happens. Once, after falling down an entire staircase, he apologized for making noise before continuing to class. The alien students stopped asking questions because the answers only disturbed them more. During advanced trauma simulation, the class gathered around industrial medical drones designed to recreate emergency scenarios. Heavy machinery moved overhead, transporting diagnostic equipment, while students practiced containment procedures. Professor Varesh, a four-armed medical specialist from the Threll species, lectured calmly. Remember, response speed determines survivability. A delay of seconds may decide life or death. Then everything went wrong. A support clamp above the demonstration station malfunctioned. Metal shrieked. Several students turned just in time to see a heavy diagnostic arm collapse. Straight onto Ethan. The impact slammed him against the floor with a sound so violent the room froze. A wet crunch echoed across the lab. Someone screamed. Another student dropped unconscious instantly. Ethan's arm twisted beneath the machine at an angle arms were never supposed to bend. Blood spread quickly across the polished floor. Fragments of white protruded through torn fabric. Bone. Visible bone. Medical alarms erupted immediately. Red emergency lights flashed overhead. Professor Varesh moved fast. All students back, he barked. Trauma beyond survivability threshold. Subject is deceased. Several students began backing away in horror. One reptilian student whispered shakily, "The human has expired." Another covered their eyes. The injury was impossible to survive. Massive crush trauma. Compound fracture. Severe blood loss already visible. The machine alone weighed nearly half a ton. No species in Academy records had ever survived something like that. Then the corpse groaned. Everyone froze. A muffled voice came from underneath the wreckage. "Ah, damn!" Silence swallowed the room. Professor Varesh stopped moving. The human shifted slightly. Then Ethan slowly raised his head. His face twisted in pain as he looked down at the mangled arm. "Oh, come on!" he muttered. "Not again." A student near the back made a terrified choking sound. Professor Varesh stared. "You are conscious?" Ethan blinked up at him. "Yeah?" He winced. "Pretty sure my arm's messed up though." The professor visibly recoiled. Students exchanged horrified looks. One quietly whispered, "Why is the body speaking?" Blood continued pooling beneath Ethan while he inspected the damage with alarming calm. "Okay, yeah," he sighed. "That's definitely broken." "Broken? Broken?" Half the class thought they were witnessing neurological malfunction caused by death spasms. Professor Varesh activated emergency responders with trembling hands. "Remain still," he ordered. Ethan frowned. "I mean, I kinda can't move anyway." Then, somehow, impossibly, he laughed. A short, painful laugh. "Guess I'm missing lunch." Nobody in the room understood what they were seeing. The human should have been dead. Every medical model said dead. Every biological standard said dead. Yet the supposed corpse was lying in catastrophic blood loss, casually complaining about lunch. As medics rushed inside, one terrified student quietly asked the question everyone else was thinking. "How?" they whispered. Ethan glanced over, pale but somehow still conscious. "You guys seriously never broke anything before?" The room collectively stared in absolute horror. Because whatever humans were, they clearly played by completely different rules. The emergency ward had never looked so crowded. Every available observation chamber overlooking Trauma Unit 3 was packed with alien medical students. Some stood frozen in disbelief. Others quietly argued with medical databases, convinced there had to be an error. There wasn't. Because Ethan was somehow still alive. Inside the treatment room, robotic surgical arms worked over injuries that should have ended any known species within minutes. Bone fractures spread across his arm and shoulder. Internal bruising. Muscle tearing. Blood loss severe enough to trigger emergency transfusion protocols. According to Academy survival charts. Mortality probability, 99.8%. Yet Ethan kept talking. "Hey," he groaned at one medic. "Am I gonna set off metal detectors after this?" The surgeon paused. "You are experiencing catastrophic trauma." "Yeah, but like, permanently catastrophic?" Nobody knew how to answer that. Outside the glass, students stared in horrified silence. A feathered student whispered, "Should he still possess consciousness?" "He should not possess life," another replied. Professor Varesh looked equally disturbed. Medical scans projected above the operating table. Fractures. Tissue collapse. Internal bleeding. The professor folded his upper arms tightly. "By all biological standards," he muttered, "this human should be deceased." Then Ethan interrupted the medical staff again. "Can someone call my roommate?" he asked weakly. "Tell him I'm probably missing lunch." Several students physically recoiled. Missing lunch? The human had nearly been crushed to death and was worried about food. A nervous insectoid student quickly began researching humans through the Academy archives. The deeper they searched, the worse it got. Human survival reports flooded the screen. Broken bones? Common. Organ damage? Survivable. Severe burns? Recoverable. Limb loss? Still survivable. One case involved a human surviving multiple internal injuries and returning to work weeks later. Another had continued functioning with fractured ribs because they didn't realize it was serious. The classroom fell silent. A reptilian student blinked slowly. "You are telling me," he said carefully, "they continue daily activities while damaged?" The insectoid nodded shakily. "There is a phrase." Nobody liked the sound of that. "What phrase?" The student hesitated. Then quietly read it aloud. "Humans say, walk it off." The room collectively froze. Professor Varesh frowned. "Explain." "I believe," the student said nervously, "it means they intentionally ignore physical trauma and continue functioning." Several students looked genuinely horrified. "That cannot be healthy. No species would evolve such recklessness." Professor Varesh slowly exhaled. "No," he said grimly. "No species should." Hours passed. Students kept watching. They expected decline. Organ failure. Shock. Death. Instead, Ethan spent most of recovery complaining about hospital food and asking when he could leave. At one point, he even laughed after learning surgery was required. "Well," he sighed, "guess this ruins my gym schedule." Nobody understood how someone this injured still cared about exercise. Finally, 6 hours after catastrophic trauma, the medical doors opened. A physician stepped into the observation hall. Professor Varesh moved immediately. "Well?" The doctor glanced at the gathered students. "The human will recover." Complete silence. Someone dropped a datapad. "What?" Varesh demanded. The physician checked the chart. "He has requested discharge tomorrow." Tomorrow. The room erupted into terrified confusion. That is impossible. His skeleton was fractured. He experienced lethal blood loss. The doctor paused, then gave the single most disturbing sentence any of them had heard all day. He says he's had worse. Nobody slept well that night. Because for the first time in Academy history, alien medical students realized humans weren't ignoring death. They simply seemed terrifyingly difficult to kill. The next morning, nobody entered Medical Hall 7 expecting to see Ethan alive. Rumors had spread across the Academy overnight. Some students claimed humans possessed backup organs. Others believed Earth medicine relied on illegal regeneration technology. One particularly terrified theory suggested humans simply refused to die out of stubbornness. Nobody expected answers. Most expected a memorial. The atmosphere inside the lecture chamber felt strangely quiet. Students spoke in whispers. Professor Varesh stood unusually stiff near the podium, reviewing lesson material with the expression of someone questioning their entire career. Then the door opened. Conversation stopped instantly. Ethan walked in. Slowly. Casually. Alive. Half the room physically froze. His injured arm sat wrapped in a reinforced medical brace extending across his shoulder. Bruises climbed the side of his neck. A slight limp followed every step. Yet somehow, he carried coffee. And breakfast. A nervous student dropped their data pad. Another visibly stumbled backward. One small avian student made a sound so distressed they nearly fainted. Professor Varesh stared. You, he said carefully. You returned? Ethan blinked. Yeah? The professor looked genuinely confused. You suffered catastrophic trauma less than one planetary rotation ago. Uh-huh. And yet you are here. Ethan shrugged with his good shoulder. Didn't want to miss class? Nobody knew how to process that sentence. A student near the back slowly raised a trembling hand. Why? Ethan frowned. Because attendance matters? The room collectively fell silent. Aliens across known systems treated recovery differently. Major injuries demanded isolation, extended healing, psychological rest. Many species spent weeks recovering from moderate physical trauma. Humans apparently showed up to lectures. Ethan sat down with a quiet groan, opened his food container, and immediately began eating. Professor Varesh abandoned the lesson entirely. No, he said firmly. We are discussing this. Every student instantly focused. Questions exploded. Are humans resistant to pain? No. Then how are you functional? Painkillers. You experienced skeletal damage. Yeah. You nearly died. Ethan paused mid-bite. I mean, probably. The room erupted again. A reptilian student leaned forward carefully. How can you behave so calmly? Ethan thought for a second. Then shrugged. Stuff happens. Nobody liked that answer. Professor Varesh folded his arms. Clarify. The human sighed like he'd explained this before. When humans get hurt, most of us just deal with it. You rest, heal, move on. A nervous insectoid student hesitated. Your records state humans survive repeated traumatic injuries. Sometimes. Repeated? Ethan nodded. Broken wrist when I was 12. Student stiffened. Bike accident. Silence. Tore my shoulder in sports once. More silence. Cracked 2 ribs during a construction job. Someone looked physically ill. Ethan kept going. My cousin survived a highway crash. A student interrupted immediately. What is a highway crash? 2 vehicles smashing into each other at high speed. Several students looked horrified. You permit this? Every day. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then finally, one student quietly asked the question everyone had been wondering. How are humans not extinct? For the first time, Ethan stopped joking. He looked around the room, noticing genuine confusion instead of fear. Then he gave a small shrug. Because when things go bad. He paused. We don't really get a choice. The room stayed silent. You survive. he continued. You adapt. You heal if you can. If you can't, you figure something out anyway. No dramatic speech. No arrogance. Just simple truth. Professor Varesh slowly lowered his arms. Because suddenly, human survival stopped sounding reckless and started sounding terrifyingly stubborn. By the end of class, nobody looked at Ethan the same way anymore. Not because he survived, but because he treated surviving like something completely normal. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Academy quietly rewrote part of its medical curriculum. Nobody argued against it. Not after Ethan. The new mandatory lecture appeared across every first-year medical program. Human Injury Response Protocols. Attendance immediately became mandatory. Mostly because too many students had already panicked after witnessing perfectly alive humans doing deeply concerning things. Professor Varesh stood before a crowded lecture hall filled with nervous students. A warning label appeared on the screen behind him. Do not assume a human is deceased without repeated verification. The room stayed unusually quiet. Varesh cleared his throat. Recent events have exposed severe deficiencies in our understanding of human survivability. Several students shifted uncomfortably. The first slide appeared. A human soldier standing with visible injuries. Case Study 1, Varesh said. Subject continued functioning despite multiple fractures. Gasps spread through the room. Another slide. A construction worker with damaged ribs. Subject completed work shift before seeking treatment. Confused silence. Then came the worst example. A human with visible burns. Recovered. Several students visibly recoiled. An avian student slowly raised a hand. Professor, why do humans continue activity while injured? Varesh paused. According to human psychology reports. He sounded deeply uncomfortable saying it. They consider inconvenience a poor reason to stop. The room collectively looked disturbed. Another student hesitated. So humans simply endure pain? Frequently. Voluntarily? Sometimes unnecessarily. No one liked that answer. The next lecture focused on emergency treatment. Important rules filled the screen. Humans may remain conscious during severe trauma. Humans may verbally downplay catastrophic injuries. Phrases such as, I'm fine, should not be trusted. Students immediately began taking notes. Especially after Varesh added, if a human says it's probably nothing, assume the opposite. The classroom quietly agreed. Near the end of the lecture, a student raised another question. What makes humans so resilient? Professor Varesh stopped for a moment. Weeks ago, he would have said biology. Dense bones. Efficient healing. Adrenal response. Pain tolerance. But after watching Ethan, he realized it went deeper. Humanity's greatest survival trait, he said slowly, is not physical strength. The room waited. It is refusal. Several students tilted their heads. Refusal? One repeated. Varesh nodded. Humans refuse surrender. Refuse limitations. Refuse endings. The professor glanced briefly toward the entrance doors. They continue because stopping feels unacceptable to them. Silence settled across the room. Not fearful silence this time. Respectful silence. Then the lecture doors opened. And somehow, perfect timing, Ethan walked in. The entire room turned instantly. Still healing. Still bruised. Arm brace removed now, though movement remained stiff. He looked around awkwardly. Sorry I'm late. Nobody spoke. Ethan frowned. What? Professor Varesh exhaled slowly. We are discussing human survivability. Oh. Ethan nodded. Cool. Then, completely casually, he added. Good news though. Doctor says I can start lifting heavy stuff again next week. The room erupted. Several students shouted at once. You were nearly crushed? Your bones were destroyed. Why would you lift things again? Ethan blinked. Because I still have rent? Professor Varesh closed his eyes. Somewhere in the room, a student quietly muttered. Humans are insane. Varesh opened his eyes again. No, he said carefully. Humans are survivors. And from that day forward, no student at the Galactic Academy ever underestimated human durability again. Mostly because they learned something terrifying. Humans didn't survive horrific injuries because they were fearless. They survived because somewhere along the way, they learned how to keep going anyway.